Gnome blessings, my fellow Gnomians. Today we're not stepping into superstition, we're stepping into reality. The reality that folklore and lived experience carry both light and dark. For a long time in the Church of Gnome, we've celebrated the playful, wise, and protective side of gnomes, fae, Sasquatch, the hidden folk. That joy is real, and it's ours. But the full story, it's a lot wider. Across cultures and centuries, people have also told unsettling tales of beings who mislead travelers, punish trespassers, swap infants, or pull the careless over thresholds they shouldn't cross. Naming that darker strand doesn't mean we're inviting it in, it means we're choosing to see the whole picture with clear eyes and steady hearts. We can honor these stories without becoming ruled by them. We can learn what they were meant to teach: respect for place, humility at thresholds, care for children, caution in liminal spaces, while keeping our center anchored in reverence, humor, and human decency. As we walk this path together, I want to place a symbol in your mind's hand: the Nomian bind rune of contact. It's a living seal woven from the ancient runic alphabet, the Elder Futhark. Five powers joined as one. The rune Algiz, which is the shield of protection; Ansiz, which is the voice of spirit; Rado, the path between realms; Gebo, the covenant of exchange; and Ewaz, the trust that binds companions. Each rune is a force. Together, they form a sigil that is ward, key, and summons. It proclaims that the unseen is near and that contact is possible when approached with reverence and consent. It teaches that true meeting is not conquest but exchange, not demand but alignment. This is why the Nomian bind rune of contact is emblazoned on the back of our minister garb. It's on the back of this as well. We carry it as we do our work to remember: guard even as you open, keep your circle safe even as you welcome the neighbor, choose what you let in, choose the tone of your home, and choose the posture of your spirit. So here's how we'll travel today. We'll listen to the darker accounts of duendes and gnomes. We'll step into the tales of the unsettling and changelings, where the fair folk don't really play nice. We'll walk the timberline with Sasquatch and other forest beings as omens, not mascots. If at any point these stories feel heavy, hold this simple course correction: you're not required to host what does not serve love. Your attention is a door, your breath is a boundary, your kindness is a shield, and your weird, steady joy, yes, even the gnome hat if you're wearing it, is a ward stronger than it looks. So keep your lantern of maybe in hand, bind rune on our backs, and let's see what these darker tales still have to teach us about respect, boundaries, and walking wisely in a world that has never been simple. Gnome blessings. Let's begin. If you listen to the old stories long enough, a pattern appears. Small figures at the edge of vision, a whistle from the hedgerow, a person who wanders off because someone just out of view was calling them by name. Across Mexico and much of Latin America, those someones are the duendes, household and woodland beings who can be playful and, when disrespected, punishing. In the south, they're cousins to the chanicas, little guardians of springs and groves who hide tools, sour milk, and, most unsettling, lead children off paths so they can't find their way home. The lore is explicit about that last part. Children get lost and must be coaxed back with offerings and apologies to the land. In central Mexico, especially San Luis Potosi and the Huasteca, you still hear fresh accounts alongside the legends. Local outlets have run features in places like Matalapa, where elders say there are stretches of creekside and orchard habitado por duendes, not always kindly, warnings to keep kids close at dusk and greet the place before you pass. These aren't court affidavits, they're community memory carried in the voice, but they repeat with striking consistency. Small figures, persistent whistling, the lure toward the trees, the child found later, confused, thirsty, and unsure of how long they've been gone. Travel further than Mexico, and the pattern holds. In the Philippines, the duende and the Nuno San Punso, grandfather of the mound, are known for pranks and for striking back if their mounds or groves are disturbed. Illness, rashes, fevers that elders insist only apology can cure. The etiquette is precise. Ask permission before cutting tree roots. Don't topple ant hills. Leave a bit of food at the edge of the yard. Children, it is said, see and hear them most easily, and that too is a caution to tread gently. Even popular write ups today repeat the same recipe of warning and wonder. Duendes are quick, mostly unseen, more active at certain seasons. There always seems to be a whistle, sometimes red eyes, often a rule about covering your thumbs, and always the conclusion respect the place. Technically, it's folklore. Functionally, it's community risk management tucked inside a story. Europe named the same neighbors with some rougher edges. In the ruined castles alongside the Anglo Scottish border, people spoke of redcaps. Not shy gardeners, but murderous goblins who hurl stones at travelers and keep their hats crimson by soaking them in blood. Their home turf is always a boundary place, a ruin, a battlement, a tower where cruelty once happened. Their weakness, in the old sources, wasn't a sword, it was scripture and the sign of the cross, which sent them howling into flame. The lesson is not subtle. Some thresholds remember, tread with care. One legend marries Redcap lore to history. Hermitage Castle, a brooding pile in the borders where the bad Lord de Solis was said to keep a redcap familiar called Robin Redcap. Ballads tell of harm and ruin poured on out on his lands until the people rose against him. The sort of tale where a place soaks up reputation until even a cloudy afternoon feels like caution. Whether you take the story literally or as moral theater, the teaching is the same. Power without reverence attracts predators. Not all European little folk are bloodthirsty, of course. Many help in the house, mend a shoe, warn a miner of bad air, but even the helpful kinds can carry consequence. In German tradition, the kobold can bless a home or punish an insult. Down in the mines, kobolds were blamed for collapsed tunnels, poisonous ore, and mischief that turned greedy strikes into ruin. Give them beer, keep your manners, and you'll come home with your fingers. Mock them, cut corners, and the mountain will take its due. The story seems harsh until you translate it. Respect the work, respect the place, and respect your limits. So, what are all these tales doing? Beneath the strange detail and delightfully specific rules, they do what good folklore always does. They patrol boundaries. Don't wander off at dusk. Don't trample sacred mounds. Don't march into ruins like you own them. Don't treat the forest like a warehouse or the mine like a piggy bank. And above all, watch over your children. For us as Gnomians, hearing this doesn't require cynicism or credulity, it asks for etiquette. When you step into a place that isn't yours, a creek bed, a grove, a ruin, arrive as a guest. When you notice the tug of curiosity in a child's eyes at twilight, maybe hold their hand a little tighter. And when your own mind wants to cut across someone's garden, literal or social, slow down and remember the old rule: ask, offer, and only then cross. That's what the dark stories are for. Not always to scare us out of wonder, but to teach us how to carry it safely. And if the price of that teaching is a whispered warning about little figures in the trees, I'm content to pay it and to tip my hat to the neighbors who keep the edges sharp. And so, if the friendly sprites of summer belong to the Seelie court, their winter shadowed cousins move with the unseelie. The bands of fair folk, said to travel by night in harsh winds, delighting not in help but in harm. In old Scottish tales, the unseelie were riders you did not want to meet on a lonely road. They were boundary police with a cruel streak punishing those who mocked the unseen or crossed certain thresholds without respect. Where the seelie were the neighbors you might bargain with, the unseelie were the ones you avoided altogether. Eyes down, mouth shut, hat in hand, walking quickly past the thorn hedge. Within the darker current lies one of the most unsettling motifs in all of European folklore, the changeling. The story appears in many forms, but the shape is constant. A healthy child sickens and cries day and night. An infant fails to grow or grows strangely. A once bright baby becomes distant, fussy, hard to soothe. The explanation offered by the old stories is that the human child has been stolen by the fair folk, and a fairy infant, weak, wizened, always hungry, left in its place. The remedy, people believe, was to force the impostor to reveal itself so the real child could be returned. Exposure to iron, baths at the crossroads, smoke or fire tongue threats that make the fairy flee. From a modern vantage, you can hear beneath the magic the grief of parents facing what they could not name: sudden illness, neurological difference, congenital conditions, postpartum stress that warped a household sleep and sanity. Story rushed in to make a pattern where life felt like chaos. And while the fair folk sometimes worked as ritualized comfort, there's a reason and there's a way to act. And it also has a terrible edge. If a child is not my child, people can justify hardness in the name of rescue. One of the most famous and horrifying cases sits at the border of myth and murder. Bridget Cleary from County Tipperary in 1895. Bridget was a young independent dressmaker with a Singer sewing machine and a bit of business savvy unusual for her time. After an illness, her husband and relatives became convinced that she wasn't herself. Neighbors whispered about fairy forts and paths and places that you shouldn't walk at night. What followed is recorded in court reports and newspapers. Days of treatments meant to drive out changelings, herbs, questions, ritual humiliations that blurred lines between folklore and abuse, ending in violence at the hearth. Bridget Cleary died. Her husband and several others were tried and imprisoned. People sometimes call Bridget the last witch burned in Ireland. She wasn't a witch, and there was no legal execution. That shorthand hides the truth. A woman died because a story grew stronger than the person in front of her. The changeling tale, once a way to name fear, became an engine of certainty, and that certainty, ordinary kindness, was set aside. It's tempting to file the Cleary case under back then, a relic of less enlightened age, but the power of the changeling motif persists because it speaks to something intimate and frightening: betrayal by the familiar. The child who no longer looks like the child he knew, the spouse who returns from illness or grief, seeming changed, the home itself feeling strange after death or hardship. The changeling story gives that feeling a face. It also hands people dangerous tools: suspicion of difference, rituals of coercion, the permission to do harm for their own good. The broader fairy archive is full of similar double edges. Fairy rings, which look like invitations to dance, are also warnings about losing time and coming home altered. Hawthorn trees and Rath's fairy forts are lovely places to sit until the lore says that they are not to be cut, not to be bulldozed, not to be used for roads without consequence. The stories patrol ethical lines for life lived close to the land. Keep promises, honor thresholds. Don't mock what you don't understand, but they can curdle when fear takes the lead. So, how do we hold all this as Gnomians? People who laugh easily, cherish wonder, and also want to walk in truth. First, we name what the stories are doing. Dark Fae and changelings are cultural pressure valves. They externalize the terror of child loss, the rawness of postpartum strain, the bewilderment of minds and bodies that won't fit our plans. In that way, they can be compassionate. They say, your fear is not unheard. They also remind communities to respect the unseen, not only spirits, but the invisible networks that make life livable. Old pathways, local taboos, seasonal rhythms, and the need to bring bread and milk to your neighbor when the wailing won't stop. Second, we mark the line where story becomes license. Anytime a tale invites us to see a person as an imposter, a baby, a partner, a stranger, it's handing us a knife. The Nomian response is to set that knife down. If a household is unraveling, we reach for help, not for ritual cruelty. If a child is different, we reach for care, not coercion. Let the older lessons survive, the respect for thresholds, the humility at sacred places, while refusing the parts of the script that strip dignity. Finally, we listen for the etiquette hidden in the warnings. The unseelie court is a name for consequences when we blow past boundaries. The better move is simpler than an exorcism. Ask the land for permission. Practice manners at the edges. Protect the vulnerable. Leave offerings of courtesy, words, water, a little time at the places that hold our lives together. You don't have to believe in a midnight cavalcade to understand what these habits protect children, elders, and the delicate treaties between people and place. When we hold the fairy archive this way, neither naive nor numb, we can let its darker strands teach without tyrannizing. We can honor the grief inside the changeling myth while building a world where difference is met with support, not suspicion, where boundaries are kept by consent and care, not by fear, and we can keep walking lantern steady, knowing that even among the fair folk, the story's sharp edges were always meant to keep us mindful, not to make us cruel. Next, we're going to go through Sasquatch and some other forest beings. If you only met Sasquatch through cartoons and souvenir shops, you might think of a shy forest neighbor, gentle, reclusive, half guardian, half joke. But the deeper you listen to older stories, to the way the timberline looks at dusk, the picture gets less domesticated. In many indigenous traditions of the Pacific Northwest and beyond, there are accounts of wild people of the woods who take as well as warn, beings who abduct the careless, who mimic voices, who serve as omens when taboos are broken. The specifics vary from nation to nation. There's no single story, but this isn't mine to author, but to share a motif that runs through many of them. Respect the forest and its thresholds. Don't be too loud at night. Don't mock what you don't understand. Keep an eye on the children when the shadows stretch and the creeks speak louder than you do. Even in modern reports, the soft version of Sasquatch has sharp edges. People describe rock throwing from just out of sight, tree knocks that answer back, the feeling of being flanked or herded off a ridge. Hunters and hikers tell of foul animal odors arriving in a still night with no wind, as if something with intent had stepped up behind them. Whether you read these as literal encounters or as the forest's way of putting teeth on its boundaries, the message is the same, that you are a guest here. One of the strangest, most enduring stories in American Bigfoot lore captures that feeling of trespass. In Ape Canyon, 1924, on the southeast shoulder of Mount St. Helens, a small group of miners prospecting for gold reportedly shot at a large upright figure near their claim. That night, in their pine log cabin, according to their sworn accounts, several ape men surrounded the structure and began hurling stones and battering the walls. Through the dark hours, they heard thumps on the roof, saw gaps between logs fill with fists and eyes, and fired through the spaces in the panic until dawn. No one died. Come morning, the cabin stood battered and ringed with rocks. Skeptics have offered bears, pranks, misremembering. The miners, shaken, consistent, and eager to leave, offered one conclusion. Something out there was both organized and angry. Read symbolically, and the tale is almost too neat. Men carve a shelter into a place that's not theirs. The night reminds them. Whether it was bears, teenagers, or something we don't have a good name for, the lesson rhymes with older teachings. There are parts of the forest that will push back. The old world has its versions of that pushback. In Norse and Scandinavian traditions, trolls are not plush toys, but forces with mass. Hostile mountain and forest beings who smash steel and, crucially, turn to stone in sunlight. They represent the danger of wandering too far from the hearth. Troll stories make the same bargain the Pacific Forest does. Enjoy the wild, but know the hour. Come home before the light is gone. Sail west to the Orkney Islands, and you meet something harsher still, the Nukkaleave, a skinless horseman whose exposed muscles and black blood drip disease. Its breath withers crops. Its presence spreads plague among cattle. It is said to be checked only by running fresh water, and in some tellings, by the rule of a season, mother of the sea, who keeps it confined part of the year. The Nukkaleave is myth, yes, but the fears it names are not. Drought, blight, sickness moving through a community like a hot wind. The story gives those fears a face and then hands the village practical wisdom in the form of taboo. Stay away from certain waters in certain seasons. Mind the boundaries that keep rot from your door. If you set these traditions side by side, Sasquatch who throws, trolls who smash, a sea thing whose breath is fever, you hear a chorus, not a contradiction. The wilderness is both pantry and predator. It feeds us, inspires us, mends us, and it can take us apart. Forest beings are a way of remembering both truths at once. The friendlier versions teach us to notice. The darker ones teach us to behave. So what does that look like in Gnomian practice? Starts with the simplest etiquette and oldest tools. Announce yourself at thresholds, trailheads, creek crossings, the first step into a grove. That could be a nod, a quiet greeting, a sip of water poured to the roots. You're not conjuring, you're choosing a posture. Mind the hour. Daylight curiosity and nighttime caution are not superstition, they're survival. If the place feels wrong, too quiet, too watched, let your body vote with your feet. Keep companionship. Most cautionary tales begin with someone alone. Bring a friend, tell someone your route, honor the line where adventure becomes risk, and leave the place better. Pick up trash you didn't drop. Step lightly. If you carry out more than you carried in, the forest ends up on your side. Sasquatch, whatever you think it is, works on us because it refuses to be fully ours. It keeps some rooms in the house of the world locked, some trails unmarked. Maybe we need that. Maybe the point of these beings, trolls, the knuckleave, wild people with arms full of stones, is not to scare us out of the forest, but to make us worthy of it, to send us in with bread and humility and a plan to be home by dark. The forest has always been both nourishing and dangerous. The beings that live in our stories, whether you take them as literal neighbors or as masks worn by the land, hold that paradox like a mirror. Our work isn't to choose one face and deny the other, it's to walk between them with good manners, a clear head, and a lantern that knows when to brighten and when to dim. So if you step back from the individual tales, the duende at the hedgerow, the changeling by the hearth, or the stones hitting the cabin roof, you can see the pattern they're all weaving. Dark stories don't survive for centuries by accident. They do work for the people who tell them. First, they keep watch where humans get careless. Every community has points of danger: deep water, unstable ruins, thin ice, steep ravines, old mine shafts, sacred mounds, the hour when tired children wander. You can post a sign, and sometimes you should, but signs rot and stories travel. A story about a red-capped killer at the castle keeps teenagers from drinking in the keep. A story about duendes whistling near the creek keep toddlers within earshot at dusk. A fairy ring that steals your hours keep dancers off fragile circles of fungus so the meadow can heal. Folklore is public safety in a language that the body remembers. The dark, too, is a way of holding grief that has nowhere else to go. Long before neurology or epidemiology, a parent watching a child's personality change had only their neighbors and the old tales to help them make sense of it. The changeling myth gave them a script, flawed and sometimes fatal, yes, but also gave them a name for their terror. In that sense, the Dark Fae aren't just monsters, they are masks for experiences that would otherwise drown a family in silence. When we inherit those myths, the ethical move is to keep the naming and lose the knife, so that to let the story say this hurts, while modern care says, here's help. Dark beings also protect more than people. They protect places. A kobold who punishes greed is really a mind saying, respect me. A troll that turns to stone at sunrise is the mountain itself warning you about weather, cold, and cliffs. The knuckleave's breath rotting crops is the island's memory of blights and red tides and the thin times when one bad season could unmake a village. When a culture instructs you to never cut the lone hawthorn, never to bulldoze the fairy fort, never to dig in the burial ground, it isn't being quaint, it is setting ecological, archaeological, and communal boundaries with teeth. Call it superstition if you like. The land calls it a truce. Of course, the blade has two edges. The same stories that protect can also be used to police and punish. Every time a tale hands a community a scapegoat, the changeling, the witch, the devil in the ruins, it offers a shortcut through complexity. That shortcut can cost a life. Bridget Cleary's death was not folklore's fault alone. It was fear and control, choosing a myth as its hammer. So when we honor dark lore, we do it with eyes open. We ask, is this story guarding the vulnerable or giving us permission to hurt them? Healthy cultures keep that question alive. They let the caution remain and retire the cruelty. There's another reason the dark persists. It keeps the world big. If every threshold is safe, if every grove is a park, if every night has an app, the ancient animal in us goes blind. We need a little respectful fear to steer us, enough to make us tie our food, learn the weather, bring a friend, and apologize to a place before we borrow it. The darker tales maintain the felt sense that we live in a world with others in it, seen and unseen. That sensibility doesn't have to lead to paranoia, it can ripen into reverence. Here's where our Gnomian practice threads through the old fabric. That bind rune of contact exists precisely because our path refuses to flatten mystery into either denial or domination. Algiz teaches that protection is sacred. Your boundaries are not an obstacle to wonder, they are its container. Ansuz reminds us to listen to the land, to the elders, to the quiet voice that says, maybe you should turn back. Rodho keeps the path clear. We do not kick in doors between realms. We walk the road that is given. Gebo insists on reciprocity. If you take, you give. If you are greeted, you greet. Ewaz holds companionship at the center. We travel with allies, human or otherwise, because lone certainty is how people get lost. Choosing to know the dark side is not the same as choosing to dwell in it. It is the difference between a sailor who studies storms and one who pretends the sea is always calm. The first is not less joyful, they are more capable of joy because their craft matches the world they're in. When we tell the darker tales of duendes and the unseelie and wildmen, we're studying the weather our ancestors passed down, not to summon it, but to sail better. So let the stories do their jobs. Let them keep children close at dusk. Let them remind travelers to mind the hour. Let them persuade a developer to move a road 20 yards so a ring of hawthorn can stand. Let them hold a name for the hard nights, and then let science, community, and kindness do what the story cannot. We're not required to host what does not serve love. So we've walked through the brambles tonight, listening to the older stories that still breathe beneath the garden statues and bedtime fables. We've met duendes that lead wanderers astray, fair folk who take more than they give, and forest beings who remind us that the world isn't as tame as the maps would like to claim. But the point of these tales was never to just make us afraid, it was to make us attentive. The old storytellers didn't invent monsters just to thrill children. They built memory palaces of caution, warnings wrapped in wonder. They said, mind the path, respect the hours when day becomes night. Don't cut the hawthorn that doesn't belong to you, and don't mistake ownership for invitation. Every culture has its own way of teaching that message. Some use demons and spirits, others use gods and ancestors. The details change, but the music is the same. Be a good guest in the world. Know when to speak softly, know when to step back. Know that curiosity is sacred, but it comes with responsibility. So, as you go about your own life, carry that ancient etiquette forward. If a place feels heavy, step lighter. If a story gives you pause, listen before you laugh. If a moment at the edge of reason makes the hairs on your arm rise, trust that your body might be remembering something older than words. The dark stories were never really about the dark, they were about how to keep your light steady, how to cross thresholds with your dignity intact and your humor still working. And maybe that's all we've ever needed to know. That wonder and wisdom live side by side. That mystery is safer when met with manners. That little fear isn't a flaw. It's the pulse that reminds us we're alive, that we still care what happens in the dark. So, may you walk with awareness in wild places. May your courage be quiet and your curiosity kind. May you find beauty where others find danger. and may your lantern never go out, even when the trail gets strange. Gnome, blessings, my friends. Until next time.